The air was thick and heavy, that kind of late summer humidity that sticks to your skin. My friends, Chloe and Ben, and I had been planning this camping trip for months. We found a secluded spot deep in the national forest, miles from the nearest road. The first day was perfect. We set up our tents, built a roaring campfire, and told stories until the stars blanketed the sky. Everything felt right, peaceful even. It was on the second night that things started to get strange. It began with a sound, a low, rhythmic thumping that seemed to come from the dense woods surrounding our clearing. At first, we dismissed it. Probably an animal, a woodpecker, maybe a deer. But the sound was too consistent, too deliberate. Thump, 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 like a slow, giant heartbeat. We tried to ignore it, turning up our music, laughing a little louder than necessary. But the thumping persisted, a steady, unnerving bass line to our forced cheerfulness. As the moon climbed higher, another sound joined the first. It was a whisper, carried on the breeze. Faint, indistinct words that seemed to dance just at the edge of hearing. Chloe was the first to mention it. "Do you guys hear that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper itself. Ben and I strained our ears. At first, nothing. Then, we heard it too. It was like someone was speaking right next to our ears, but their voice was coming from all directions at once. The words were impossible to make out, just sibilant, hissing sounds that made the hair on my arms stand on end. We decided to call it a night, hoping sleep would offer an escape. I crawled into my tent, my heart pounding in my chest. The thumping and whispering continued, a terrifying symphony just outside the thin nylon walls. I must have drifted off at some point, because I was jolted awake by a new sound. Scratching. A slow, deliberate scratching on the side of my tent. It scraped along the fabric, moving from the base up towards the zipper. I held my breath, frozen in my sleeping bag. Whatever was out there was now right next to me. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. I wanted to call out to Ben and Chloe, but a primal fear kept my mouth shut. The scratching stopped. Silence. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then, a shadow fell over my tent, blocking out the moonlight. A tall, impossibly thin figure stood just on the other side of the fabric. I couldn't see any features, just a dark, elongated silhouette. It stood there, motionless, for what felt like an eternity. I could feel its presence, a cold, malevolent energy that seeped into the tent. Suddenly, the whispering started again, but this time it was different. It was inside my head. A single, clear word, repeated over and over. Hungry, hungry, hungry. My blood ran cold. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for it to go away. That's when the tent zipper began to slowly, deliberately, unzip from the outside. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure terror. Ben and Chloe shouted my name from their tent. The zipper stopped. The shadow vanished. The whispering in my head ceased. We packed up in a panic, throwing our gear into our bags without a second thought. We didn't even bother to put out the fire. We ran through the dark woods, guided only by the frantic beams of our flashlights, not stopping until we reached the car. We never looked back. We never spoke of what happened, but sometimes, when it's quiet, I can still hear it. That slow, rhythmic thumping, and a voice in my head whispering a single, terrible word. Thanks for listening. And if you have your own creepy stories, share them in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Stay safe out there. My dad always said camping builds character. He loved the woods, the smell of pine, the crackle of a campfire. Me? Not so much. But when he suggested a father-son trip, just the two of us, I couldn't say no. We hadn't done anything like that in years. We drove for hours, deep into a state forest I'd never heard of. The further we went, the more the paved roads turned to gravel, then to dirt tracks barely wide enough for his truck. By the time we stopped, the sun was already dipping below the treeline, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Perfect spot, he announced, gesturing to a small clearing by a slow-moving creek. It was remote. The silence was the first thing I noticed. Not the peaceful kind, but a heavy, watchful quiet. The air was thick and still. We set up our small tent and got a fire going. Dad was in his element, humming an old tune as he whittled a stick into a sharp point. I tried to relax, roasting a marshmallow over the flames, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every snap of a twig in the surrounding darkness made me jump. Just the forest settling, son, Dad said, noticing my nerves. Nothing out here but us and the squirrels. His voice was calm, but it didn't calm me. As night fell completely, the forest came alive with sounds. The hoot of an owl, the chirp of crickets, and something else, something I couldn't place. It was a low, rhythmic scratching sound, coming from the direction of the creek. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Dad paused his whittling. He listened for a moment, his head tilted. "Probably a beaver," he said, but his eyes didn't leave the darkness beyond our campfire. He tossed his finished whittling stick into his bag and pulled out another piece of wood. The scratching stopped, but the unease didn't. I kept glancing over my shoulder. Later, as we were getting ready to turn in, I saw it. Just for a second, in the flickering firelight. Two pale eyes, low to the ground, reflecting the light from the edge of the woods. They blinked once, then disappeared. "Dad," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "There's something out there." He followed my gaze, peering into the blackness. "Animal, probably a deer." He zipped up his sleeping bag. "Get some sleep. We've got a big day of hiking tomorrow." I crawled into my own sleeping bag, my heart hammering against my ribs. I lay there for what felt like hours, listening. The scratching sound returned, closer this time. It wasn't the sound of a beaver. It was the sound of claws, dragging slowly through the dirt and leaves. Scratch, drag, scratch, drag. It was circling our tent. I was too scared to move, too scared to even breathe. I wanted to wake my dad, but I was paralyzed. Then, I heard a new sound. It was coming from inside the tent. A low, guttural humming. It took me a moment to realize it was coming from my dad. It was the same tune he'd been humming earlier, but now it was distorted, menacing. Slowly, I turned my head. In the faint moonlight filtering through the tent fabric, I could see his silhouette. He was sitting up in his sleeping bag, perfectly still, facing the tent door. Just sitting and humming that awful tune. The scratching outside stopped. A shadow fell over the tent, impossibly large. Something was standing right outside, blocking the moonlight. The fabric of the tent began to press inward, right where the shadow was. I wanted to scream, but the sound was caught in my throat. My dad's humming got louder, more intense. And then, he spoke, his voice not his own. It was a raspy, ancient whisper that seemed to echo inside my head. "It's time to build your character, son." The thing outside let out a low growl, and my dad, he started unzipping the tent door. I don't remember screaming, but I must have. The next thing I knew, I was running blindly through the pitch-black forest, branches whipping my face, the sounds of that humming and the thing's pursuit echoing behind me. I just ran and ran until the sun came up, and I stumbled onto a road. I never saw my dad again. The police searched for weeks, but all they ever found was an abandoned campsite and a small tent, ripped to shreds.
The crisp autumn air was one of the reasons I loved solo camping, that and the silence. I had found the perfect spot deep in a forest I'd never explored before, miles from any trail. I set up my small tent, built a modest fire, and settled in as the sun dipped below the tree line, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The only sounds were the crackling fire and the gentle rustle of leaves. It was perfect. That's when I heard the first noise that wasn't mine. It was a whistle, not a bird, not the wind. It was a clear human whistle carrying a simple, repeating tune. It sounded distant, maybe a quarter mile away. I froze, my hand hovering over my cup of tea. Another camper, unlikely, out here. The park rules were strict about staying on marked trails, and I was definitely off-piste. I called out, "Hello, anyone there?" Only the fire answered with a pop. The whistling stopped. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just my imagination, the woods playing tricks on me. I finished my tea and was about to crawl into my tent when the whistling started again. This time, it was closer, much closer, maybe just beyond the ring of my firelight, the same simple, haunting tune. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. This was no longer a curious anomaly, it was deeply unsettling. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight, its beam cutting a sharp white line through the darkness. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling slightly. This isn't funny. Again, silence. I swept the beam of light around my campsite in a full circle. Nothing, just endless trees, their bark like wrinkled skin in the starlight. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. It had to be the wind, right? A strange echo through the valley. I convinced myself that was it, zipped up my tent, and tried to sleep. I must have dozed off, but I was jolted awake by a new sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from right outside my tent. Tap, tap, tap. It was slow, deliberate. My blood ran cold. It sounded like a fingernail tapping on the nylon fabric, just inches from my head. I held my breath, listening. The tapping stopped, and then I heard the whistle again, but this time it was barely a whisper, as if the person was right next to my ear, just on the other side of the thin tent wall. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I was paralyzed with a fear so profound it felt like ice water flooding my veins. The whistling continued, that same maddeningly simple tune, over and over, a breathy, intimate sound in the dead of night. Then came a new noise, a zipper, not my tent's zipper. It was slow, agonizingly slow, z-z-z-z-z-z-z-i-p, a pause, zizzip. It sounded like someone was opening and closing a zipper on a jacket or a bag, right outside. I stayed completely still until the first hint of dawn crept through the forest canopy. The sounds had stopped hours ago, but I hadn't dared to move. As soon as there was enough light to see, I scrambled out of my tent. The clearing was empty. My campfire was cold ash. There were no footprints other than my own. Everything looked exactly as I had left it. But when I went to pack up my tent, I saw it. The zipper pull on my tent door was gone. It had been cleanly snipped off. And lying on the ground where it should have been was a single, small, white bird feather. I didn't stay to investigate. I packed my gear in a frantic rush, didn't even bother with breakfast, and practically ran the entire way back to my car. I've never been camping alone since, and sometimes, when the house is quiet at night, I can still hear that faint, whistling tune.